Hi everyone, Kat Cole here. I just thought I would start out my video with a little face-to-face portion just to say hello and introduce my presentation, but in a minute I'm going to move into a PowerPoint slideshow. So for my book report I decided to read The Art of Critical Pedagogy by Jeff Duncan Andrade and Ernest Morel. It's a great read. I think that most of us are already familiar with it because we've read clips of it in our other LMU classes and we watched some videos from the Roses from Concrete organization that Jeff Duncan Andrade now is a part of in Oakland. But anyways, there's, aside from the clips you may have already read, there's a lot of rich information in this book. And so if you haven't actually looked through the book itself, I highly recommend it. And I'll explain more about why. First of all, what's the story of the book? There were four specific case studies that the authors participated in and facilitated to collect their research about the effectiveness of critical pedagogy in urban education. So the first case study and the longest one was that both authors co-taught an English class at East Bay High School for 6 years. And then also at East Bay High School, they helped coach a women's basketball team. There was a college access program at South City High School in Southern California, which was facilitated by Morel, and a summer research seminar that brought together urban teens from a large metropolitan area in Southern California. The author's intent in writing the book is to, well, first of all, to inform readers about the meaning and history of critical pedagogy. The book includes a lot of background about theories of critical pedagogy. The intent is also to suggest a method for applying critical pedagogy to the context of urban schools specifically, and then to prove the effectiveness of that method through research and data. And finally, to advocate and promote the use of this method of critical pedagogy in urban schools to improve schools and communities. So, in other words, the authors use critical pedagogy. That's the common theme throughout these four case studies, and they have kind of come up with a way of using critical pedagogy to specifically meet the needs of urban students. And so the intent in writing the book is to share that with other educators and to suggest that other educators should also use this method in working with urban communities. And then finally, the last bullet point that I have here is that their ultimate intent is to revolutionize urban education such that it acts against social inequities rather than perpetuating them. So this particular method of critical pedagogy is the way that they think is going to get us here to a revolution in urban education. The target audience for the book is definitely teachers and educators in urban schools in the U.S., so all of us, in other words. And, oh, I made a typo right here. A quote from the preface of the book is from the authors. "We seek to generate authentic internal and external dialogues among educators who mine the educational discourse in search of texts that offer guidance for teaching for a more socially just world." So their intent, and I think they are successful, is to provide tools for educators who want to teach in a way that promotes social justice. The research methodology that the authors use, well, first of all, they talk about the critical research tradition, and the idea that in contrast to scientific research, critical research is defined by the interestedness of the research, more specifically by the explicit desire to use research as a tool for social change. So, in other words, unlike, one would be in the scientific process, the authors don't claim to be necessarily objective or unbiased. They definitely have a specific purpose in mind, but their research is meant to analyze and perfect the tools with which they can achieve that purpose. So the second quote here says, "We are unabashed to admit that we loved and continue to love our research subjects who often participated as collaborators and friends." Like I said before, there were the three main sites: East Bay High School, South City High School, and a major university in Southern California where they did the summer research seminar. And in terms of their data collection and analysis, they collected a massive data set that included observational field notes, videotapes of classroom interactions, samples of student work, interviews, and academic achievement data. That would include grades, course taking, graduation, and college admission. And using all of these various types of data, they analyzed that data through the lens of or through three different lenses: academic development, critical consciousness, and action towards social change. So those were the three things that they were trying to measure through this data set. And then lastly, one thing I really like about their work is that they examined the relationship between the critical teaching events, the student skill and identity development, and the real work for social change. And so they tried to measure the results of their work not only with the end of looking at student achievement data, but also looking at how their work in schools ultimately impacted the larger community as a whole and impacted social change on a more macro level. In terms of how well they support conclusions and perspectives through collected data and experiences, I would say through collected data, they do a really good job of citing other studies and citing work from other authors or experts. And they do use statistics to set a context for their work. However, I would say overall they could benefit from more numerical data resulting from their case studies, and specifically I think they should have included some visual representations of their own data that they collected. Throughout the book they don't have any graphs or charts showing or tracking the academic data of the students they worked with. And as educators, they should know that some of us are more visual learners, and so I thought that was one thing that was missing from the book. But in terms of using experiences to back up their conclusions, they definitely do a good job of that. They have a lot of qualitative data, including looking at individual student stories and also using quotes from tapes or interviews to show students' perspectives. So the theoretical perspectives are frameworks that the authors use. Well, first of all, chapter 2 in the book provides a very extensive review of theory related to critical pedagogy, the most significant being Paulo Freire, but the authors also summarize contributions of other theorists around critical pedagogy, and they also bring in the ideas of scholars whose work is not typically associated with critical pedagogy, authors who mainly focused on topics like racism, sexism, or homophobia, but who also made important claims about critical pedagogy. And so there's, if you want to just read chapter 2 to get a good review of that, the topic of critical pedagogy in theory, that's a great resource. The authors define the cycle of critical praxis, for their own purposes as this 5-step process. So I'll flip to this diagram. Number 1, identify a problem. Number 2, research the problem. Number 3, develop a collective plan of action to address the problem. Number 4, implement the collective plan of action. And number 5, evaluate the action, assess its efficacy, and re-examine the state of the problem. From there, you go back to step 1. The author's perspective on issues of social justice, cultural diversity, and people from culturally diverse backgrounds well, first of all, start with social justice. The authors believe very strongly that the public school system currently works as a system of oppression that keeps low-income minorities stuck in the least desirable roles in society. And they believe that the school system must be revolutionized in order to create an equitable society. So that's like a core tenet of where the authors are coming from. They definitely see improving urban education as a social justice issue. In terms of cultural diversity, in Chapter 7, the authors go really in depth into the possibilities of a pan-ethnic studies approach to social studies curriculum at the high school level. And so one quote says, "Given that our schools are rarely monoracial environments, and given that many racially marginalized groups experience injustice in similar ways, we felt strongly about putting forth a pan-ethnic studies approach that allowed students to see themselves and each other as implicated in the same sets of historical problems." So I guess their perspective on cultural diversity is that it can and should be used as an asset and a tool in urban schools for students to understand other cultures, understand each other, but also to understand the deep-rooted intersections and cross-sectionality of the struggles that various cultures have faced throughout history. And then lastly, in terms of people from culturally diverse backgrounds, the authors promote what they call culturally relevant pedagogy, meaning, like some theories we've read before, that teachers should be better equipped to investigate what is going on in the lives of their students generally, so that their curriculum and pedagogy can be reflective of those lives. So this kind of relates to what we've read before about taking an inquiry-based approach to understanding and learning about students' cultures. And then from there, using that knowledge and adding it into the curriculum in order to create a culturally relevant pedagogy. And then secondly, in their conclusion, they state, "We must help these young people to feel better about themselves on the multiple levels of race, gender, class, sexual identity, and geography." My overall evaluation of the book is overwhelmingly positive. I would say read it. Some things I like about it in particular are how it's rooted in theory, but it also provides practical tools and actionable suggestions for educators like us. I also like how it stays focused on the bigger picture of positive social change. And I like how passionate, truthful, loving, and inclusive the authors are just in their voice. And yeah, you could just really feel the love in their writing style and the way they talk about their experiences with students. And then, in the conclusion, they answer their own essential questions of basically how can critical pedagogy be used in the urban context. And so right here is a list of suggestions that they have. And so if you want to take a look at those, I would recommend pausing the video and just reading through them, since I'm out of time to explain them in depth. But if you want to know more, then you can read the book. But this kind of answers the question of how is the book relevant to the field of education. It's very relevant for all of us, because I think that these suggestions here are ones that we could all use in our classrooms as we think about next year and develop lesson plans and curriculum for the future. My final rating of the book is 4.5 out of 5 stars. The half star is because of, like I said before, that some lack of numerical data and visual graphics of the case studies, but the authors did acknowledge their subjectivity, and I still believe that the research is powerful and useful. And then I also, one last kind of criticism I had is that I think they should come out with a new edition of the book that addresses the Common Core, because they have some parts in the book where they criticize standardized testing, and I would be really interested to hear what they had to say about the new forms of standardized testing that will come with the Common Core. So I would really like to see a new edition in the coming years. So thank you for listening, and that's my book review of The Art of Critical Pedagogy, Possibilities for Moving from Theory to Practice in Urban Schools by Jeff Duncan Andrade and Ernest Morel.